Hi, welcome Krish. Welcome to this CTQ Smartcast.
Hi, Harish. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So we'll put you on the other side of the table. I found out about this question, so I thought I'll pose this question to you first. So, in terms of career and achievements, what are you really proud of?
Well, it's a tough one to say, but I think if I look back in various places, the people who have grown from the companies that I've been working and taken on bigger roles, I think that's what makes me really proud of. And I can count now many CHROs or many senior people, different companies who've all worked together. It's not because of my influence or anything, but just that some have worked with me, some have been part of my teams, but I've seen them grow and take on bigger roles. And I think that's probably what I would see as that gives me the greatest satisfaction.
Yeah, yeah. In this case, we will not say correlation. Don't confuse correlation and causation. I'll go out on a limb and say probably it is causation that we're talking about here,
I know.
right?
Yeah, we have to err on the side of what kind of is makes sense for us. But you're right. I think there are many examples. For example, people who have worked with here in HR within Unilever. There are a lot of Unilever people in Singapore that I've worked with, people from China, Vietnam, South Africa, Sri Lanka, who were with me, but we've given them opportunity and they've all become CHROs of a big company. When I look all around, I think that gives me the greatest satisfaction, I would say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's this concept of brag doc, right? What are the things that you can brag about and you put it in the document. So you didn't mention the book which we want to cover a lot in detail today. So, how did this book come about? It seems like a culmination of your thoughts and just ruminations and also collection of thoughts from your peers, colleagues, friends. So how did this come about?
Yeah. I was actually thinking of writing a book, but it was on a very different subject. I thought I'll write a book completely on how to emotions in the workplace because I did a kind of a doctorate in that, and I thought I'll get something more practical in there. That was my idea actually. But this was very much a serendipity. One day, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, who's the vice chairman of Tata Sons, called me and said, "Listen, this publisher is there. They're keen on doing an HR book. You should write." And the publisher reached out to me. And then I dilly-dallied. I said, "I don't know what to write and all that, and all time and all that." But I think during 2020, during the second half of the year, as the pandemic wore on, I thought, let me start thinking about it. And therefore, so when I started thinking it flew, there was a flow to it. I would sit on a weekend and just write one chapter a weekend kind of a thing. So that's how it was. So it's more about the idea was how do you make HR more contemporary, number one. And number two, how do you take the more practical aspects of HR to both business people and HR leaders so they can really learn from various experiences. So this is meant for a larger audience, not only for HR, but for business people. It is meant to bring a lot more contemporary ideas to HR. It's looking at best practices from my experience, plus the many CHROs, CEOs I've spoken to. So it's more like in a way, a playbook, of what is HR now. So that was the idea.
And we also found out in our background research that there was always this bug of writing for you, right? You also wanted to be a sports writer. So where did that get left in your journey?
Yeah, no, I think I used to like writing. When I was young, I used to do a little bit of try to write some essays or thing. And after that, I gave up. And one of the things that I always liked was to be a sports journalist, to follow great sporting events and talk about it. That was one of the things. Time passes, we just move on with our work.
Life
But maybe
happens.
one day I will do that. One day, maybe the next phase of my career, I'll be a sports journalist. Who knows?
Yeah. Which were the iconic sporting moments that you really wanted to be a part of and wanted to write about?
No, I think partly cricket is there, but I was also looking at other sports. For example, the World Cup, it's football World Cup and different things, and therefore that was something that I was interested. Some Olympics and the kind of thing about some of the athletes who go through all that for that 2 minutes of glory in the Olympics or 2 minutes of spotlight and all that they go through. So I think that's what I wanted to really talk.
Great, great. Yeah. So coming back to the book, Krish, can you talk about why you wanted to call this book? Why did you give this title of Catalyze? Right? Your thoughts on that?
Well, the title came up. Actually, when I started writing, the title I looked was Maximize Your People Potential. That's how I started writing it, saying this is all about how do you maximize your people potential. That's how I started writing. And then as I wrote, etc., and towards the end, I thought, see what it is. The idea is that, there is a concept kind of bread. You have momentum. There is a momentum curve which goes on, which is you continue doing what you're doing. But if you want to really bend the curve, say, listen, I want to now grow faster. I want to do something different. Then you got to do things differently. And that's where you got to catalyze some action. You got to do things differently. So that concept stayed with me saying, yeah, I think things are going well. But if you really want to catalyze and get most out of your people and go and reach the next higher curve, then these are some things you can do. And that's how I looked at this catalyze kind of thing.
Right.
And there is this one, when I was an XLRI, long, long back, which was 82, 84, we had a professor called CTQ Nair. And I still remember one of the things. He said one of the roles of HR, he said, is like a kind of a lightning conductor. You got to really get the charge and make it work. So, this whole thing of that and catalyze stayed with me. And therefore I said, that's how I got into that name.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, interesting that we spoke about sports writing some time back and the reasoning that you gave for how you came upon this title. While reading your book, I kept going back to Paddy Upton's book, The Barefoot Coach, where he talks about the role of the coach in the success of the Indian cricket team 2008 to 11, culminated with the World Cup win. Small things that they did, again, a very different context, how to deal with a sports team, especially a team like Indian cricket team with so many celebrities. They cannot do things on the ground for them, right? They have to get these people to go and perform on the ground. If you think of it, very similar to what you're talking about here, the catalyst doesn't do the reaction. It is the necessary condition for the chemical equation and to also accelerate it, right? I just found it interesting to draw those parallels. Having said that, Professor BJ Fogg, who talks about tiny habits, has this very interesting theory of not being able to affect motivation. He says motivation is something that humans can only serve. There are times when motivation is very high, there's times when motivation is very low. You need to create those necessary conditions such that when the motivation is high, you can make the change happen. Can you juxtapose that with what you have written about Catalyze and how to think about this from the motivation standpoint?
Yeah. If you look at any organization, let's take a step back. I think the point is there's always a need. Some people always feel we need to change. There are some areas we got this, we need to improve. So there's always that thing there. Now the question is, why do we fail? Why do we don't do it? And that's where this whole thing of motivation comes. And I thought there are three or four gaps that we have. Yeah, I think one of the gaps is really an intent gap. Sometimes you're too busy with operational stuff. You're too busy with running around, and then you don't really think this is there. Or your priorities are different. You say, listen, at this point, let me get the firefighting done, or whatever it is. Or the leadership says, listen, focus on this. So that's the first. You don't have an intent. Secondly, you may have an intent, but you're not really good at creating the solution. You're not able to really think about it. And here the motivation is lack of ideas or lack of putting the right things together. So designing the right solution to make it effective. Yeah. So that's the second one. The third is an execution gap, which is really clearly you may have the solution, but in HR, most or everything has to be done by the rest of the company. HR can provide something, but unless the managers and the leaders and people do something, you will not be able to do anything. So a true role of HR is catalyzing action. It's about designing, talking, and getting your managers on board, getting leaders on board, and making that execution happen. And now technology is very important. So therefore, you want to really do some amount of technology because you want to scale it. That's important. So there's that execution thing. And there, I think this whole motivation is to really create the motivation for change to people. And that's where this whole thing about when is the right moment to do something? You've got to look for it and maybe try and find. Sometimes the company is doing well, we'll say, yeah, we've got to change. Some cases, you say, listen, we're not doing well, maybe you got to change this. So you've got to, like things like performance management, it's always good to change when the company is doing well. Then you're a little bit relaxed and you can also make those changes. So you got to find the right time for certain of those changes. I think the last gap we have is maybe we just don't have the resources, either the money or the budgets or the people or whatever it is. So to your question, I think it's a little long answer, but I think for each we got to find the right motivation. Yeah.
Right.
I think for the first intent, I think this motivation is all about getting ideas, sparking ideas, benchmarking, kind of visioning, saying, where should I be? And that's where this probably book helps, saying, maybe there are some ideas to do. And then the solution, I think that's where also. So I've tried to really focus on all these three elements. Think big, what you can in terms of the vision. Think about what are the elements of a solution that you can do. But at the same time, also don't forget the execution, because you got to have the right things to get the execution done. So I think that's what I would really look at. And we got to find the right motivation and the right levers for each of those.
Yeah, yeah. Again, a follow-up question to that. What you spoke about is great, because people, companies need to bide their time to find the right opportunity to, move different levers. But what also we've seen is that, these are things that come because you need to be in that space where you're relaxed and now you're ready to change. You need to get to a certain point. You cannot be fighting existential problems to get there, right? And that's where those bad habits and bad culture and all sets in. How do you get out of this vicious cycle then? That unless you do the right things, you're not going to get better. But a lot of times, just to get that stability in life, to be able to do things, companies seem that's a story that they're telling themselves that, yeah, we need to do something, we need to think very here and now. So how do you get out of this vicious cycle?
Yeah, I think, see, it's in most companies, because if you're running around getting things done, you would not be able to do the transformation that is also needed. Yeah, and therefore, either the mind is the capacity is not there to change, or there's too much in a frenetic. I think that's a challenge that they've got to step back and say, and that's where the role of leadership comes in. Leadership of the company as well as the HR leadership, saying what is our vision, what should we be, and then try and put in maybe teams to really make those differences, or get sponsors to take something. So you got to find some time. If you don't find, if you don't put the vision, then you still be working it out. So I think the only way to do it, I think, is the leadership thinking about it, leadership saying, I want to make a difference. Yeah, both the HR leadership or the leadership of the organization, and they can do it. And I've seen many startups where they've been frantic, but then the kind of co-founder says, we want to do something different. And then they work, they get a HR person, they think, and they try and do something. Yeah, there is this realization. Yeah. So firstly, you have to get that realization that I've got to move to the next topic. I can't continue this momentum. I've got to go there. And when do they get that is important, and getting that realization, but also finding time to make that happen. The right team, mind space is very important. Yeah, it's a challenge. We can say it, talk about it, but I would say the day-to-day running around, sometimes this is all. Sometimes I think the investors ask for it, saying, listen, why don't you invest in your team or people? And that becomes the next thing. So I think it's somewhere getting the mind space of the leadership that this is important.
Yeah. Going back to the cricketing analogy, I think it's like the inside out field, right? You need to protect the singles as well as the boundaries. You need to do both.
Yeah.
So one thing that I really liked about your book, Krish, was the use of the frameworks. There were quite a few frameworks that I was aware of, and I'm a big fan of some of these things, especially the Jobs to be Done framework by Clayton Christensen. And you've used that to make your point in a very interesting way. Quickly, if you want to talk about some of the frameworks that we've spoken about, the Jobs to be Done, and also the SPM framework that you talk about, then I'll have some follow-up questions on how to actually apply them in a company.
Yeah. No, I think the jobs to be done is clearly something that I listened to Clayton Christensen when I was in Unilever in Singapore. He did a session for us. And then Unilever adopted that in some ways and discussed in talking about how they will look at their objectives or goals, must win battles or jobs to be done, that kind of a lingo. But when you really look at it, at the heart of it is really this thing about find out what really needs to be done and what is the job that needs to be done, and therefore decide how you want to do it. Yeah. And he gives, Clayton Christensen gives a great example of this milkshake, yeah, which is there. I thought that was a very nice example. Now, So, and maybe people should read the book to see what that example is. But if you look at it, what are the jobs to be done is, I think that really helps you focus on the outcome. Yeah. And in HR, one of the things is sometimes we're too much functional or silo driven. And there are different, what do you call, functions in HR which kind of collide with each other. One will say this and CNP will be, and they'll say, I want both thing. There is always thing. And therefore, sometimes when we go into a thing, we become too functional in our thinking. So this jobs to be done really looks at what is the outcome you need. What is it that you need to be done? Kya hona mangta hai? That kind of a thing. I think you got to be drilling down, identify that, and then say, how do I make it happen? Yeah. So I think that was bringing a more outcome focus to HR. I think the other one really is about what is talent. I think general thing is, I think the principles are there is no one talent which is great for all. Talent is great for you, may not be great for me or for this company or that company. So each company has to define what is great. So therefore, there is no universal talent. And that's where I said, and there was always this, why do you run after one group? Because that what somebody is running after may not be the talent for you. Think about the fourth thing, and that's how the whole idea came up of the skills, behaviors, and behaviors in HR we used to call competencies or whatever you want to call it. But simple things: what behaviors would you like to see in the person? What skills? What are the things that he or she should be able to do? Then comes the right experiences. It may not be very important, but in some jobs, it really helps build the right foundation. What kind of jobs a person should have done to really help you say, maybe they've taken these kind of things, yeah, or have they got that background or that kind of. But the last one, mindset, is very important. Because the mindset again may not be so much for the early career people because you're still developing and growing. But once you reach mid-career or senior, the mindset is very important because by that time your mindset is quite strong. You're either a growth-oriented person or a person who's very much about managing costs. I'm taking two different things.
Right.
You're either a person who's really focused on driving risk or a person who's really focused on saying, I want to really ensure compliance and controls and stuff. So you get to that. And that mindset is important, especially when you're really looking at organizations. So therefore, I think these four are important. The skills, as you go higher, the skills become less important. Yeah. What becomes more important are the behaviors, the mindset, and the experiences. As you are early on, maybe the skills and behaviors are more important. So I think you got to keep these in mind as you start planning of what is the right talent that you need to look for.
Yeah, yeah. I was reminded of the discovery versus delivery skills that Clayton Christensen talks about in the Innovator's DNA as well. Right? I was thinking of that when you mentioned how people, after growing, the skills change, or rather, the focus of their work also changes. Also, interesting thing that you mentioned was that again, when I was thinking about, you talked about the positioning of the HR function in a company and how it should be catalyzed. If you just look at the two terms, right? Human resources, most companies will have roles, designations in the realm of HR or people versus catalyst, right? Catalyst is so much more action driven and you will actually feel as, it's an aspirational thing. You would want to join a group which is a catalyst, but HR seems a bit bland. Any take on that? Do you think, companies should actually rename their HR teams to catalysts?
Yeah. No, I think there are some companies that are trying to do that. They started to now move HR to people and change or people and culture. Those are the kind of things that they're talking about. I think some of the young startups do this evangelists, people
Right.
evangelists, and people catalysts. They do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think the big companies tend to refrain from it because you can promise a lot more, but you may not be able to achieve it. So you got to be careful that you're catalyzing with what. Sometimes it may be a big name, but what can you
Right.
really do is a kind of a question.
Yeah.
See, the whole idea of HR is, I think things are moving. If your HR in the past strongly was very much admin oriented or IR oriented,
Correct.
and things have moved over time. And this concept of HR as resources came in like any other resource. You have people, you have money, you have things. So you're managing resources. That's how
Right.
this thing came. But I think over time things are changing. And now we've got to really move into the mindset that, listen, this is one of the most important kind of sources of value. So how do you do it? Yeah. So therefore, how do you can rename? I mean, there's somebody who said, listen, this should really be called human potential rather than human resources, because that's thing. So therefore, you can decide which of the. I think name helps, but I think more it's the spirit about what you
Right.
want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned the SBEM framework, right? The skills, behaviors, and what kind of experience and the mindset. So how should people be thinking about this when they are actually looking at hiring? And I'm talking about people who are not really trained in any, so they don't have the experience of HR, right? So these are founders, and they know what it takes for people to be working in their company. But in most of the smaller companies, they don't typically have HR heads. They understand this, they read your book and they say, wow, this is great. How do they then apply something like this in what they're doing?
I'll say firstly, they've got to be clear what they want. I think it starts with their own clarity of their strategy. Yeah, I think they should say, listen, and what is it they want to be known for? Let's say, if take any startup and say, in 5 years from now, what should we be doing? Therefore, they should be clear about it. Also, be clear what jobs need to be done in their company. Right? Suppose I'm a startup and I'm into some, let's say, grocery delivery startup. What are the jobs that need to be done for me to be successful in the next 5 years? Think about those and put it and say, these are the jobs to be done. That will tell you what talent is needed, what kind of talent is needed. So clarity starts from strategy. Yeah, I think don't go and say what people, but say what you need to get done. And then you go and say
Right.
what people. So that's the first step I would tell them. Look at what is it, what are the jobs you need to get done in the company, and then say, okay, to get that job done, what is needed. I'm just saying, for example, again, going to a grocery delivery thing example. As they say, listen, the job that I need to get done is really set up a great automated logistics function. But that's somebody who can, that is where I need to do it. And therefore, what is needed to do that and what kind of person is needed is something that you'll get clear. Yeah. So then once you're clear with that strategy, then you start hiring. Yeah. And therefore, don't just go and then you say, okay, what kind of skills I need to see in that person? What kind of behaviors? And behaviors really, you'll say, listen, I think this most job behaviors. Normally, most companies will go for the standard stuff, collaborative, whatever you can have, this so-fi standard stuff.
Hmm.
I think the key thing then is the experience. Listen, I want be clear. Listen, if this person should have done this kind of experience, because I think I've seen in the past that somebody with an experience in a smaller startup is much better. So you write down 2 or 3 points so that gives you an idea. And last one is mindset. You say, okay, if there is one thing, and the question you got to ask is, what is the one thing that will make this person successful? What is the one thing that you need to see in that person? I think that always comes to being the kind of what they call as attitude or mindset or the X factor or something they call. I think, and then that'll boil down to the kind of the mindset that you need in that person. So that's what I would say for the more senior levels.
Right.
The more junior levels, I think you needn't worry so much about the mindset and stuff, but you got to say, okay, define for yourself what kind of a company you want to be. And you say, listen, I want my people really in this company, I want customer focus, yeah, or I want total innovation focus. So I think once you've defined that, look for people with that kind of a thing and people with the right skills. And the behaviors means the behaviors that will help you with your innovation. Yeah, I think that's what you need. So I think a little bit of thinking helps. Recruitment, sometimes we go like a machine gun, look for who's a good talent and get. And sometimes as people, one of my headhunter friends call me, there is this trophy hunting saying, I want a big name from a big company, get
Right.
those trophies.
Hmm.
But is that relevant? So therefore, I would say do these steps. Think about the jobs to be done. Look at what kind of people you need. Then use the SBAM framework to identify the right people for the more senior. The lower level, look at what is it that you want your company to be known for, what behaviors are going to be very critical for you, and then look for those in your people.
Yeah. So this resonates a lot with me because a lot of what we do is also in the realm of helping founders articulate their culture. And when we actually do this exercise with them, we make them go through different aspects of the company, from execution to strategy to customer focus. Think about all these things, and I keep saying there's a bit of an IKEA effect there, right? Because they've deliberately thought about this, articulated it, then it's very difficult for them to go away from that now that they've done so much of thinking. But the one question that always comes back to us, and that is what I want to pose to you next, is yes, I get that this is the kind of experience and mindset that I'm looking for. What people struggle with is that theater of the interview process, right? Where they know that whoever is coming in, the candidate is at their at their best, and it's like the Instagram version of that person, right? They'll talk about everything good. So, are there any tips and tricks that you know over your years of experience of taking interviews that helps in identifying these kind of things? Or should you be even looking at the process with a completely different eye? It's not that half an hour, 1 hour of interaction that is what should be decided. Your take on that?
There are lots of things that people, but I have found that for most senior people, I think less formal settings is very important. Talk to them in a thing, whereas a little bit informal, just so that it is not, they don't have to play something just or somewhere, so that you're a little in a chat in a way which is a little bit less formal will help you to really break down some of those differences. Meet one or two times, get other people to also see, so that you get a feeling of two, three people. And all that, I think that's all very important for senior people, so that you also, because see, in that interviewing a senior person, it's also about they are selecting you. So that you've got to talk about it, and you've got to ensure that there is a clarity that it's not only you also have to sell the company, and they have to also, so you got to do both. And I think that's important there. Yeah. So I think those things, references also are important. I think in this, you may have to really go to a job or two back, because this current job may be difficult, but talk to people who worked with, just to understand what is the mindset, etc. So I think the references sometimes always give you a clue about that person, especially the senior leaders you want to hire. Yeah. So I think these would be the thing. There are some companies which do think. For example, I've seen that a company like Bosch really uses a kind of behavioral event interview by a non-thing, completely person who doesn't know, just to interview, just to identify what it is. And they may give you feedback. You may choose to take it or not, but at least it is an independent third party who has no context about it, who just look at it. So I think that also sometimes helps, getting completely a different view of a person who doesn't know this job or the company, but really comes from a more from a competency. What has this person done perspective? So those I think have been very useful to hire more senior people. I think at the junior level, it is all about using them to do real case studies, talk about examples of case studies, or talk them through simulations. I think that really helps the younger people, because they will talk about what they have done, and then you can talk about a case and what they'll do. So at least you can find out their thinking or analytical ability, plus what have they actually done in their earlier jobs. So put both together.
Yeah. And any go-to questions that you use?
Not really. I think I've not interviewed a lot in the last few years, but I think it's clearly two questions is that what are some of the things they have done that they are really proud of, and then maybe go deeper in terms of what they did, how they did, etc. Or the other one I would like is, what is the one problem they've been most frustrated with, and what did they do about it, and how they did it. And finally, the sense that if they were to really trace their development over the last 3-4 years, what has happened, how have they developed themselves. So these are 3 or 4 questions I find useful to understand more about what they're going
Right. Yeah, I think these are great questions. We'll definitely list them down and put them in bold in the transcript for people to pick up.
through.
Yeah. So one interesting thing that you mentioned when talking to when people companies are trying to hire senior people, they're also trying to sell their company. And that is probably one of the many interactions that a potential candidate is having with that company. And that's also a great way of actually conveying the company's culture. So if you think about it, there's so many different touch points that I may have, from the security person in an office to the receptionist to the person who's interviewing me. And finally, once you join, so there's so many different touch points. Who ideally should be the custodian of the company's culture so that all these touch points are integrated? Both in a small company, probably it's going to be the founder, senior leaders who can drive that with a lot of personal charisma. But as things grow bigger, and the kind of companies that you have worked with, few thousands of people, how do you make sure that this is being maintained?
I think that's where it's a collective responsibility of the leadership. HR can help show the mirror, show what is happening, get regular discussions on it, uses engagement surveys or whatever, Glassdoor surveys and all of that. But yeah, I think this is what the collective leadership takes responsibility, saying, listen, this is what it is. The top 20, top 50 people in a company have to collectively take responsibility for this culture, because culture is what we all collectively behave. Our day-to-day behavior is culture, and therefore we. And I think what happens is, again, this culture part is very interesting. Maybe I'll just digress a bit here. When anybody talks of culture, we all talk of the simple human element of culture. Respect is not there. The person was arrogant. They didn't respond on time. And those kind of things. That's what people always try and say that they determine the culture of the company. But I really want to look at it and look at for any kind of company to look at culture at two levels. I think the first one is a strategic element of culture that they want. Yeah. And this is about what kind of behaviors will help them be successful or will help them differentiate in the market. There are great examples. Smart says it's all about being frugal and cost conscious, and they want that culture all across. They work on it. You take an Amazon, which will say it's all about innovation and customer focused innovation that we want to really work on. Yeah. So I think you got to choose one or two things that's going to be distinctive for you. Either it's your focus on innovation or your customer or your whatever service. You got to think of that, because that really is the most strategic element of. Then comes the second part, which is what are the behaviors that you think people want to see around. Yeah. And there, I think most companies will be similar. You can't say, listen, I'm not going to respect people. They'll all want respect. They'll all want integrity. They'll all want inclusion. So that's important. But you got to identify and say, these are the three or four things I want to do, and then focus on it. So therefore, there are these two parts. The human part is a non-negotiable, and it is actually similar across all companies. Yeah. But the difference is how companies make it come alive. That's where the difference is. Once you do it, how do you make it come alive? How do you bring it to thing? And that's where we have to. That's where the role of the leadership comes in. That's where the role of the routines that you put in, the day-to-day practices or routines that you put in to make this happen. That's where the training of the middle managers, because they are the ones who will make this culture work. But how are they aware, and how are they working, and what feedback are they getting, and how are they evaluated is important, because they are the ones who will make this. So, and then you get, and then a continuous kind of measurement. So I think there are four key things: your description of what you want to do, your commitment of your leadership and all the everybody aligned to it, your social architecture working towards it, the middle managers, their training, recognition, how are they, their performance evaluation, that has to work in sync. And lastly, your feedback on how things are going, measures and checking how things. I think all those have to be done. So I think that's what I would look at culture, your strategic part as well as the human part. Be clear and then try the differences, how you really make it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And just extending this, we talked about the big companies, right? So, is there a problem of scale when you are trying to do this across so many centers, so many countries for a company like Infosys? And I'm speaking as an ex-Infosian, so I know what it takes. Does that scale also then affect what you're talking about?
Yeah, of course. See, when you have to get something done across so many people, different countries, there are many variables that come. Sometimes people are also changing in the sense that maybe they're completely new leadership in a place, and therefore you're trying to do something. So it is a mix of many things. You will have maybe that the culture is strong in one area, but maybe in a smaller country which is just starting a thing, it may not be there. So you've got to start working on it. Sometimes the country cultures also play a role. Maybe a Mexico would like something different, or a kind of a Nordics may like because they believe in certain things. And those are also some things that you got to keep factoring. And therefore, it's a constant stuff. It's about talking about it. It's about leaders talking about it. It's about measuring. It is about recognizing people. And that's how it is. And you can, and the sense that there is given a large company across things, as long as there is broadly within that thing, then it's fine. There are certain non-negotiables which will say, listen, integrity, sexual harassment. These are all clearly areas where we're going to be, there's going to be no nonsense, and this is what we will do, and that is clear. But there are the other software elements of culture about what is respect, what do you mean by responding on time. Those are all little different, and that is where you have to really start defining it and saying this is what we would like.
And how much does marketing, or rather thinking of it as marketing, help in propagating culture in a company? Because what you're talking about, I have this, often draw this parallel, right? Like that the culture is a product and your internal employees are your audience. Then you need to think of it as marketing, where you're actually thinking segments. There are the senior people who actually know the culture, but they need to be treated differently as compared to the newcomers who need to be indoctrinated in your culture quickly. That's where the quick ramp up comes. You need to give them enough case studies, use cases of how this culture really works, like, right? What are these anecdotes? So does that help in just surfacing these stories of what, like you said, what respect really means in my company? How does that help?
Yeah, I would say marketing is probably it, but it's using communication
Correct. Yeah.
technologies. Yeah, I think it's very important because we also, for example, you look at different personas within a company. There is a fresher kind of a persona who are there, first 3-4 years. Then there is a mid-manager kind of a persona. Then there are, so within that you have 2 or 3 different things. There's a group which is saying, I'm keen on learning. There's another group which says, I'm keen on compensation. So you have those different personas there. You have people who've been with the company for long. There are veterans over 10 years, and there are people who've just joined you. So therefore, there's a huge thing. So yeah, you're right. And communication becomes very important because you got to look at these personas. You got to look at what is the way to talk to them.
Right.
Because email is going out of fashion. People
Correct.
don't read email. So how do you really get to them? So therefore, is there a different way? So we have to try various things, videos, blogs, etc. You got to get storytelling is a big way. How do you get stories told, and how do you get leaders and others talk about it? So in a large company, this communication is actually becoming a very important thing. Also, it's getting tough to reach to people so easily. When they were all sitting here, you could, but now they're all across. How do you reach them unless they want to choose to come? So how do you make it interesting? So it's a challenge for communication specialists to really see how do you really communicate there.
Right. Yeah. And in the respect of communicate context of communication as well as generally, you talk about the role of emotion, and that seems to be something which is generally missing, right? Most companies will have engineers who will take pride in the thinking, and they will want to get rid of emotion wherever possible. That's like the default. And now there is enough studies to show you, there is enough evidence to show you that the emotion plays a big role in changing behavior and getting people motivated. So one is, once people identify that this is a blind spot, they have that inclination to change it. How do they change this, right? How do leaders, how do founders bring more emotion into work? How do you do that?
I think, see, there are two things here. We just have to be careful. I think sometimes people look at emotions in the more popular context that he is emotional or she is
Right.
emotional or whatever it is, in the sense that the person is either getting angry or expressing their emotions in a way which really puts off others. That's the popular meaning of emotion. They say he's an emotional person, that he's like sometimes moody. These are the kind of words that people use. I think we just have to remove that popular but
Correct.
understand that. I think that the understanding is that there are collective emotions that go through people. And I think those collective emotions are important. And I think that's what a founder needs to know, that these collective emotions are a great source of getting things done. Yeah? If you want to grow a company and you want to really make people take ambitious targets, you need to have the collective emotion, simple thing. You need to have amongst your team the collective emotion of, let's say, optimism, yeah, and maybe pride. I think that is needed. How do you build that? Because once you have that emotion, that will build the energy to really achieve those things. Yeah. So therefore, you have to understand the role that these collective emotions. It's not about one person being moody or one person being, that is the more populist level. But I'm talking about understanding emotion is understand what are the emotions that are generally driving people. Understand there are collective emotions which can be used to really manage your kind of business. So therefore, if you are, for example, if a company is saying, I want to really shut down one unit, yeah, and what is the best way to do it? What kind of collective emotions we need to see in the company? Maybe the collective emotion of compassion. And if they see that, and if employees see that, then I think you can manage the change much more easily. And I think those are the kind of things that they've got to keep in mind. So I think most people feel that when they're doing something, they're not checking if there is this right emotion behind it. Let's take recognition. Yeah. I think recognition, oh, I've seen when I joined the company, we never worried about recognition. We were never recognized. We never got anything and it went on.
Hmm.
But now, thanks to social media, thanks to a lot more work, recognition is becoming important. People are also wanting it. They're seeing other companies posting on LinkedIn, this, that, and all kinds of stuff. So the need for recognition is increasing. But I think the key thing is you got to, as manager, you got to understand what are the emotions that need to go along with this recognition, which will make it stick. And I think the two emotions I find are the emotions of pride and the emotions of gratitude. If these two come along with recognition, then it becomes true recognition. And what is pride? The pride is not about I've passed out from IIM, or that's not the pride. But the pride saying it's a pride, say the Indian cricket team, which has over 10 years won various tournaments, and now the people can feel proud saying, listen, we have now that pride will make them fight more. Yeah. So the pride of overcoming something and achieving something. So that's a pride. And the gratitude saying, listen, I'm really thankful for this because I'm thankful to all my colleagues and I'm thankful to the company for it. If you get those emotions along with recognition, then that recognition becomes truly useful. Otherwise, it is one more paper which people will forget and go away. So I think that's what we as leaders, we as managers have to start thinking. How do you look at those emotions more at the collective emotions level, and use that to really build engagement, drive your transformation, all of that.
And do you see leaders, senior leaders of a certain vintage, how easy or difficult is it for them to make this change? Now, like you said, most people who are 45, 50 plus, when they started, things like what you're talking about in recognition were similar, right? So now how do they adapt to this change that, yeah, they're now dealing with people who need to put up these things on their probably Instagram stories that they've, got something. How do they deal with this change?
Yeah, no, I think we have to, that's where we have to communicate. Again, it's not so much age of people. Sometimes I think it's people who may be older, but they're also pretty used to some of these things. And it's not about, I wouldn't say age is as big a factor, but you're right. We've got to get people understand this,
Right.
and therefore getting them to understand that this, let's say the persona of a fresh engineer less than 3 years, what is he or she craving for? What really drives them? What kind of emotion is important for them to understand? And I think that's where just talking about it, communicating, a little bit of training, getting them to interact with people so that they also see what is happening. All that will make them realize these things.
Yeah, I think it's at the heart of the whole diversity and inclusion concept as well. It's about you just understanding what those people are coming with, what is their background, and what are their challenges. And we saw that at play in the last 1.5, 2 years, where a lot of companies, where the younger workforce realized that the senior managers just didn't have the same understanding because of different demographics, right? Somebody living in a family, with part of two, two kids struggling to do homework or dealing with preschool issues, whereas the senior manager saying, why aren't you attending my calls because this person's children are in college or whatever.
Yeah. Correct. I think this thing about this empathy was very, very important. I think people
Right.
didn't realize women going through managing giving at home, etc. And so yeah, but I think what has happened is this thing has made them more aware, I think. I
Yeah.
would say generally because of lots of communication, seeing they have increased their empathy about what is happening in this. And I think I've seen that as one of the benefits, the greater sensitivity to diversity, sensitivity
Right.
to those issues have increased over the last 2 years.
Right.
That's
And
actually resulted in change is something we will see, but at least the
correct.
mindset has
Yeah.
changed quite much.
And I think in a lot of cases it may just be the lack of awareness, which is what has come to the fore in the last 2 years. And now, of course, from now that you are aware, you're not changing your mindset is a different problem. But I think this, like you said, it's a good thing that
Yeah.
has happened over the last couple of years. So, couple of last few questions, Krish. The book, like we mentioned, it's an excellent playbook for HR, right? Again, taking the startup founder lens towards this, if somebody like a startup founder wants to start applying lessons from this book to their company, where would you recommend they start? Because there's a lot to be done. How should they prioritize? Is there a Pareto's law that, yeah, I do this bit, or rather power law that I do this and it'll give me 80% of impact? Is there anything like that, or how do you recommend they start?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Maybe I should think about it like that. No, I think the first thing I would say, have to do is really read the chapter 2, which is all about understanding what are the jobs to be done. Yeah, I think
Right.
it's important both at the company level and within the people area. What are the jobs to be done is something they got to be thinking. That's the first step they got to. And once they've done that, I think they're going to say, okay, I've given about 10 or 10 foundational, what I call outcomes or foundational thing that people should be looking at. Look at what are those two or three there which really make a difference, whether is it all about attracting talent and building talent that is important to them, or is it about building a culture, or is it about training and building capability of people? I think these are, or is it about really ensuring the right cost structure? Because we are in an industry where I'm not competitive. How do I really look at ensuring my right cost structure? Or is it the focus on execution that we have to? So I think you may not go through all, but you can just take, okay, these are the one or two I want to really work on, and then just work on that. So it starts with your, what are the kind of strategic jobs to be done for the company. Then look at, okay, within, if that has to be done, what are the things I need to do in HR, and then what my biggest challenges, etc. And then you can choose which are the three or four things you want to really, and any of these you can start off, take one or two, work on it, and then slowly move towards the last outcome, which I think will take some time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And going back to what you had mentioned earlier, right? So sometimes you just need to bide your time, wait for the right opportunity to strike
Correct.
when you're,
Correct. Yeah.
planning to launch
So
something.
see, yeah, I think you also have to, it's a balance, because at the same time you have to deliver business,
Correct.
etc., etc. And there are some things where you have to say, this I want to really be good at. There may one or two things you may say I may not prioritize this. So
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. So you have to make that choice which is relevant for your business.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Krish, any recommendations of books or podcasts or people that we should follow, or things that have shaped your thinking around people, and anything that you
Oh.
would recommend?
Yeah, I think I should now keep that list ready, because the people keep. No, I think there are a lot of good books that one can read. I think if you were to really start off with, I think one of the books that really made me start thinking a lot more about HR and business is this Jim Collins' Good to Great. I think it's a good book. And I think even now, the two elements that he writes about level five leader, I think is still valid. So I think the Good to Great is a good book to start with. I think Clayton Christensen and Disruption is another one which I think people can read, because I think it really brings some great examples there. I think there are a lot of books on the newer what I call researches on people, on social sciences.
Right.
A lot of books on behavioral economics. How will you make change happen? The Atomic Habits by James Clear,
Yes.
Charles Duhigg on habits. These are all based on neuroscience. That's thing on habits. That is something good to read. I think this thing about psychological safety by Amy Edmondson, which is also talking about what is it and how do you really build it. That is there. Carol Dweck and the growth mindset, which is all about this concept of mindset, really comes there. So that's Carol Dweck there. I think those are, I think, and Martin Seligman, if you really want to understand positive psychology, emotions, and all, and his book, a couple of them, but the latest one on optimism is good because it just tells you the thinking. So I think these are the newer age thinking where there is a lot of behavioral economics, behavioral science, as well as some of the latest stuff on positive psychology. Of course, the Kahneman's book, Daniel
Yeah.
Kahneman's book, Fast and Slow. It's a big book. I've struggled to complete it. But if you can get a podcast where you read, it's a good one, because I think the ideas there are phenomenal. I've used many of those ideas in the book, and Kahneman is really a very good person to read. Yes, I think these are all I would say, the latest. We used to have this Dave Ulrich and all, but I think they're more of the 70s, more of the 80s now. I think things are more with some of these later stuff.
Yeah. And I think most of the books that you've mentioned, Krish, are also those from which you can quickly apply lessons. I think, and that's probably the difference between most of the other books that you mentioned and Thinking Fast and Slow, which reads like a
That's
a
a tough
thesis,
one.
doctorate thesis.
There's another nice book I read called Emotional Success by
Mm-hmm.
David Destino.
Mm-hmm.
And I've taken some ideas from the whole idea of pride and all I've taken from his book.
Right.
Very good. I think he's really also got some lots of research backed kind of things.
Yeah, yeah. So let's come to the last section, Krish, where we pose certain things, words, topics to you, and we want you to give your hot take on what will be the future relevance of that thing. So think of it as a rapid fire, but there's no time pressure. But you can give me your hot take on that. So the first one is both India and worldwide, these traditional centers of corporate hubs like Bangalore and Silicon Valley. Is that changing? Do you see that changing? What is your take on that?
No, I think it will be more distributed. See, even if you look at our company, our leaders all across, I think you're going to have, and many companies, traditionally, if you look at Unilever, they would have everybody in London. Now they've gone all across. So I think those centers are getting more distributed now. Physical locations are losing a little bit of value. But there are some kind of advantages of that hub, of Bangalore or a Silicon Valley, bring some advantages. But once the company is grown and set up, I think the leadership gets quite distributed. So I think they need not continue to remain a hub of that significance anymore, I think.
Okay. Second one is the traditional interview process. Is that going to change with AI bots suggesting that these are the people who should be hired, or I don't know what is going to change? How is it going to be relevant, the traditional interview process?
Well, I still believe in the traditional interview process. I still believe in it with the right kind of a thing. I think most people would like to do that. The bots and others may do the work to shortlist and get you three or four people, but in the end, you have to really understand. And I think there are some things you can't, especially at a mid and senior level, without interviewing people. Maybe at a much more at an operative level, yes, some of it need not be there, and you can use a little more of tests and other stuff. But as you want to get into more leadership level, I think the interviews will have to be more important. We'll continue.
Right. Now we come to the slightly left of field topics. So one is in the current OTT world in India, what is the future relevance of Bollywood?
No, Bollywood will definitely be a content producer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bollywood will be there. It will still be content producer, and OTT will learn from Bollywood, and it will continue there. If you see, again, similarly, Hollywood, because that's where the stars are, that's where the directors are, that's where, and they all produce content. And now they have greater power with them. They can produce it for the OTT, they can produce it for the theater, they can be independent, they can do many things. But Bollywood will still probably be a strong hub.
In spite of the pressures from regional content becoming better and more interesting.
Yeah, it may eat away some, but I still think the biggest market share and biggest thing will still be Bollywood. Budgets and this and that, it will still be big.
All right. And final one, what do you think is the future relevance of one day international cricket, the 50 over format?
Oh my God. Yeah. I think it's a midway kind of a thing, right? I think, see, the one day internationals in day to day, all these tournaments is gone. But the significance in the World Cup is very strong. Still, the one day international World Cup is like the gold standard of any tournament in cricket. It's still there.
Right.
I don't think they all look for that. I think that's where it is. But all these inter-country tournaments have lost their significance on one day. And the tests, and then maybe you're right, 2020 are more popular. But one day is becoming more the ones where the ultimate World Cup. So I think it may still continue in that range for some time. I think.
All right. On that note, Krish, I think we moved from everything from your book to what has influenced you to cricket to Bollywood. We've covered a lot. This is a fantastic session, a lot of learning for me. This is a great book, very interesting topics, very actionable playbook as well. And I really look forward to the day when we can actually do this in person sometime. Right now we are two states away, one state away, but we can do this in person. And again, some emotional connect for me. I still take pride in the fact that I spent 3 years in Infosys. So I think that
Yeah, you
still
should
is
come. You
there.
should come and visit our campus, and sometime in Bangalore, or when I come to Pune, we can catch up to have a Infosian back on the campus. But thank you. As I said, this book was more, frankly, it is more a way of sharing what I knew, and also more a way of putting together information that I've collected from many of my CHRO friends and people who I've worked with. So it's not just my kind of wisdom; it's all there. Idea is that people can use it in some ways that is that if it spurs people to think differently, that really helps.
And
Thank
and
you.
I and I wish, Krish, that just like how you have taken that extra effort of sharing your knowledge, this book catalyzes other leaders to actually do the same thing. I think this is a great book on that note as well.
Thank you. Thanks. It's
Thanks a
been a
lot.
pleasure talking to you.